Test-driven development. Um, Consider myself as not an expert. I've never actually done a major project um, using test-driven. I do dabble in it. So if you think I missed something, feel free to just interrupt. And if you have a question, again, feel free to interrupt because I'm very interruptible. Real-time processing here. Okay, test-driven development. Uh, we're going to talk about what it is, why to use it, and then we're going to spend most of the time talking about how. So, what is it? Automated testing in concert with feature development. Um, Basically, you need to design your features with testing in mind. I'm not going to cover that, um, but it's really hard to do test-driven development if you don't really start at the beginning with testing in mind. Generally, are you going to write some of the tests, a lot of the tests, maybe even before you start developing, and then you write your code to satisfy the tests. A lot of times you'll have test scripts and you'll be able to run them even before anything else has happened, and they'll just fail, telling you that you haven't written any code yet. So why should I use it? Um, Basically, you know something works because you have tests that say that it works. And if you can't test it, how do you really know that it does what you say it does? When you find a problem, how can you tell if you fixed it? You write a test, and once the test passes, then you know you fixed it. Also, you're fixing problems. When you fix something, how do you know you need to break something else? Tests will take care of that. And even if you are a master and never break anything, somebody else is bound to break your code. Also, from a business perspective, having a test suite makes your system solid, improves your bottom line. So how do I do this? We're gonna, what's that?
Another advantage, if you at some point want to refactor your code or replace
Yes.
a library you use with a different version, it helps to be able to run your test suite and know that you haven't broken anything by doing those things.
Yes. And you can do that very nicely.
So in other words, there are things that you may want to do to your code
Yeah.
that might break your code due to no fault of your own because you're changing.
You're trying to
somebody
improve
else's
it,
code that you use.
improving
Yes.
performance,
Right.
whatever you're doing,
Right,
or
exactly.
trying a new module. Somebody come
Yeah.
out with a module that helps your code. So how do I accomplish this testing? You're gonna want to have some tools. You're gonna develop a strategy, and basically this is what I'm going to talk about the rest of this, and it's going to be a little bit, mix and match. There are slides about both of these, but everything is kind of both. What tools you use are going to be determined by what strategy you use, and vice versa. So the foundation for Perl testing is TAP, the Test Anything protocol, which is a well-defined, really simple mechanism for doing testing. They have a website. You can go and you can find out all the details. And Perl has modules. The base for TAP is a test harness. What a harness is it wraps around all your test scripts and processes them. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Prove is a script that comes with test harness. Prove basically runs all the test scripts that are in the T directory underneath a package. Basically, between the two, they run your test scripts, they summarize your output, and give you some results, let you know if your package actually does what the tests say that it needs to do. I already said that. TAP syntax. TAP syntax is really simple. If you don't know it, it's a good thing to know. You start with a plan. I have two tests. If my test succeeds, it says okay. If my test fails, it says not okay. Some management things you can do is skip tests. Basically, it tells the processor that I'm not running X tests for some reason. The processor wants to know, that there are a bunch of tests. It needs to know that the proper number of tests were run, and if I skip them, I need to tell it. And this is just, the output from your test script needs to say I'm skipping X tests for, because I said so. Usually it's for a better reason. Like if I am installing, let's see, something with,
Windows.
huh?
Because you're on Windows.
Right, there you go. If I'm installing it on Windows, it's going to skip some tests because it's not Linux.
Or vice versa,
any other-
you may have tests that
exactly.
are only needed on Windows.
Exactly.
I use it for things where when I'm writing a web service wrapper, I will skip tests that require a key, because
Right.
when you run the test on CPAN, they aren't going to have a key installed
Yeah.
for that web service. So skip these particular
So you
tests.
skip
Yeah.
fine tuning and things like that.
Or if you're writing a module that can optionally use another module but is not required, then you can skip
If they
the
don't
test
have
of that
that one.
module if they don't
Right.
have that installed.
Another administrative bit of syntax is to do, let's say I have just some feature I haven't written yet. I can write tests, and I'm just going to say to do for each of those tests, and it's going to automatically succeed even though the test will fail. I haven't written that functionality yet. So the tap syntax allows me to just say to do this test because I know it's going to fail, and I have no intention of having it work right now. But again, the tap processor needs to know that that test is present, otherwise it's going to say there's something wrong with my script. One of the things that your test harness will do is let you know, for instance, if your test script crashes. If it crashes, obviously something went wrong. It's going to tell you that because you didn't run all the tests you said you were going to run. The last little administrative bit, if you run into something, say you're running a whole suite of tests and something happens that is just a problem, you say bail and the test suite will stop. So it won't go and run all 4,000 of the rest of your tests. It's just going to stop. So that's the essence of the syntax. If you really want more details, go to the testanything.org site and it'll describe them in excruciating detail.
Hey Dave,
Yes.
just to follow up on the last expected results. So obviously you'll have tests that should pass. Just make sure you also can specify tests that should fail. Is that
If
possible as
you
well?
if you are running something and you run a piece of code and you think it should fail on your end, then you really need to make so the test expects a false value. And this will show that it passed. You still want this to come out and say okay.
If you say it gets back to what your definition of succeed is.
Exactly. So if success equals failure, then you need to tell your script, and so this thing has to see. And we'll see that in a little while. I'm going to go through the general functions for running tests in Perl.
And while we have a slight break, you mentioned the pretzels are warm.
Pretzels.
I was gonna say,
Good idea.
I have many of my tests, I wrap the call in the val and then check to see that the error message I get back is what I expect it to be. So that's, if the test passes, if the error message is the one I'm expecting.
Right. And we'll see how to do that. So here's the next tool that you're going to deal with is going to be testing modules. There's quite a few of them. If you go on CPAN and search for test, you'll get a huge pile of results. Now, excuse me, let's swallow this pretzel. I didn't even know there was a test module until I did this talk. This is I never use it, but I figured I would talk about it because it actually gives you the foundation, all of the absolute basic necessities for testing. There's the plan method, which tells you how many tests, or which you can tell how many tests. You can tell which tests are to-do tests, and so it'll automatically succeed those even if they fail. And on fail, you can give it some particular action you want to take if it fails. So this is the absolute minimum for running test scripts. It has an OK, which has actually has 3 different ways you can call it. You can just give it a Boolean, which tells it pass or fail. 2 values, it compares them. If they match, it passes. Value of the regex, if they match, it passes. And then there's a skip, which if the skip test succeeds, it doesn't actually do the test. Otherwise, test parameters is basically the same as the OK function up above. And so that's what's that? This is on the test module. You probably have never used the test module. Yeah. So most people use test more, which has, of course, more, lots more. OK is, I think the basic syntax for OK is just a value, is usually a function call or something, and if it comes back false, yeah, if it comes back true, then yes, it's okay. If it comes back false, it's not okay. But it's just your basic, if this is true, then it's okay. Does a comparison.
One important thing about test more, if I may, sorry to
Go ahead.
interrupt, is that you can specify a name for the test so that the output will specify, will
Yes.
tell you whatever string you gave it as the name of the test.
Yeah.
So that you know what's passed and what's failed. Does test.pm do that too?
It generates that.
Okay.
Test
So
more.
test more, you can give it whatever you like.
Right. That's right. That's a good point. In test more, all of the methods in test more give you the option to present an extra parameter, which is the test description. If you remember from the tap output, there was the OK, not OK, the test number, and then there was a message after it. So the test.pm just kind of made that up based on what you passed in. Test more gives you the option to provide that string. Hey,
Sorry, guys.
I'll get that. Gives me a chance to take a bite.
Now he's rushing out to go fix this.
So, OK is your basic. It has 2 parameters. If the first parameter is true, it says the test is OK. The second parameter is the message. Is takes 3 parameters and it compares the first 2. If they match, if they're equal, because it actually does an equal on them, I believe it checks to see if they're numeric or string though.
I've always ran into problems with that. I think it always does string.
Okay,
And I've
that's
ran
possible.
into problems sometimes when it doesn't do what you expect, so I always use CMP OK.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, it checks to make sure the first 2 parameters are equal, one way or another. Then we have isn't, which checks to make sure they're not equal. Like does a regex comparison. Unlike does regex non-match. CMP OK. You think that's probably the string comparison. can okay, check and see if the first parameter can do a method using the universal can. ISA is, sorry, the word just dropped out of my vocabulary.
Checks for class inheritance.
Yes, inheritance, test for inheritance. Thank you. New, what new does is it actually calls new on a class and makes sure that you come back with a success and you get the proper class in return. Subtest I thought was kind of interesting. I hadn't seen it before. It actually takes a piece of code which can declare a plan and do a bunch of tests all in isolation from the current plan. So I can just write a piece of code in a library someplace and run it as a sub-plan to my current plan. And
Really useful.
I think it's very useful, especially when you're dealing with a lot of similar classes. You can do some interesting things with that. Pass, it pretty much just says everything's okay. It prints out the okay message with whatever string you give it. The value behind this is if you have a really complicated test, you can run through a whole bunch of stuff and check a bunch of conditions, and if all the conditions are right, you say pass. If any condition comes out wrong, you say fail. So you have those two options, and instead of, you know, printing out the okay or the not okay and trying to figure out what number you're at, this way you'll get the proper number for the test and everything in the tap output. Require okay checks to make sure that you can require a module. Make sure it instead of actually failing if the require fails, it just says not okay if the require fails. So it's not much different than a require, except that your script will keep running, your test script. Use okay, pretty much the same thing, just doing a module, and of course it's going to run through all the other stuff that use does, rather than just a require. Is deeply, I hope everybody can see the bottom there. It's what it actually does is a deep comparison. If you have a reference, you pass two references in, and it will actually go through the any array or hash keys, and it'll make sure that everything matches. And the nice part about this is in your output, it will show you the first place where a key doesn't match the value between the two references that you pass. Then there's three more here. There's diag, which gives you a test diagnostic. Test diagnostics actually show up through the harness. So if you're running your tests and you want to be able to see something, even if it's in a harness, you'll use diag. If you only want to see it when you're debugging, you're going to use note, because the harness is going to eliminate the message. Everybody remembers what the harness is, right? Okay. And there's also explain, which it doesn't output anything. It's just a way to expand all your references, make them human readable. You can always use dumper or YAML or whatever instead, but explain is provided by testmore. So testmore is probably the most common one. The next most common one is testmost, which oddly enough provides a whole bunch more. It actually, testmost is a combination of testmore and 4 or 5 other modules, giving you more differences, exceptions, and a lot of other things that you can look for. Handy if you really need a lot of other stuff. Then of course, you know, this is Perl, so we need a test simple. and of course you have to have test tiny and test light. Where would the world be without light? Some more interesting things. Test Inter is actually does interactive testing. It allows you to test in debug mode, so you can set breakpoints at a particular test so that when it hits that test, it'll stop. You can also use it to say, I only want to run this test. I don't want to run any other test. It'll just run the one. Test group allows you to group tests together. I don't know how else to add it. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of like the subgroup,
Subtest.
but the subtests, yes. But it allows you to do it on a more I don't know, it's a different level of work than using the subgroup function.
There's, in the official TAP protocol, there's like 2 different proposals for doing subtests, one type or another, and the one that Test More put out is actually neither of those.
Is it really?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
I didn't know
so
that.
I don't know what Test Group does, but I bet it's common.
Has
Yeah.
anybody used test
I've
group?
never used either one of them.
Because I use subtests a lot.
Do you? And it works?
Yeah, it works fine.
I've never used either. So,
One of the advantages of a subtest is that you can group a whole bunch of tests together, and if the first 1 or 2 fail, or if at some point enough fails that you know the rest aren't going to succeed, you can bail out of that without having to bail out of the whole test script. So you can just say, well, I'm not going to test any more of this aspect of my code because I know it's all probably good, but I'll still test the other stuff. It's kind of nice.
yeah. Excuse me. Test subs is kind of an interesting take on the whole test system. Instead of using expression, it uses code refs. So for OK, instead of OK with any excuse me, instead of OK with a value, you say OK and you give it a code block, which turns into a code ref, and then it calls that in order to determine whether or not the test passed or not. And it actually provides all of the basic features, but it takes a code ref as the first parameter rather than an expression. So that's an interesting variation on the whole scheme, basically. This one's kind of interesting. It uses a shorthand. I didn't really have time to learn exactly what the shorthand was about, but you actually write the tests in a shorthand and then it converts it into Perl code. Test timer lets you do timing. It's not. Yeah, I think it's performance. It times each test and gives you results, basically. So some of the strategies that I don't know. Inline testing is one of the things that I like to do. When I do unit testing, a lot of times if a particular module is very technical and the tests need to be integral with the actual functioning of the module, I'll put the tests side by side with the module so that if I decide to change the way the module is built, I just change the tests in the module. And it can be very handy. It also has its downside. It can add a lot of extra kind of useless text to your module, but it also can be slightly documenting for certain things because it shows how to use methods. Test inline.
Okay,
What's
let's just
that?
ask, how do you do that then?
Well, I've got 2 examples here. Test inline is one that's available on CPAN. Test inline, the one thing I don't like about test inline is that it breaks up each chunk into its individual test instead of running the whole script as one test or one test script. But it probably does very well for some things. I did use that for a while. What it does is it uses pod and pulls out each individual chunk of pod, turns it into an object, and then executes those little chunks in order to test the code in the module. There's another one which I actually wrote and I have not put it on CPAN yet, which actually pulls out pod from your script, and it uses a custom pod tag. So you do a begin test, insert some code, and then cut, and what it does is it appends all of those chunks together into a single script and runs the whole thing it actually makes a file. So it runs the whole thing together, so that allows you to build things up as you go along and continue to make use of what you did in the early on modules. It also allows you to use additional modules that you might need, because with test inline, if you wanted to use a module more than once, you have to include it in each block. With my inline test, you only have to include it once, and you can build on whatever it is that you're doing as you continue to progress through the script. I haven't used it.
So if you created a variable in a previous test and it's still available in the next one, that's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and whatever data is assigned to it, it's still there. So I use that a lot with the stuff that I do.
Could
I would
that,
certainly be interested.
I've been trying to figure out how to get it out there. It's mostly the time that's missing. The time to turn it into something releasable.
How would that work with a CPAN release? I can see how that would work for a module that you're writing on your own in-house. How would that work with a CPAN module?
Basically, all it does, it just reads through the .pm file and grabs the pieces that it needs. It uses the pod parser, parses through the pod, grabs the pieces, concatenates them all, and just runs it. And you'd have to include the script or make it a dependency so that it would get installed, but it would work just fine.
So you'd write some sort of outer test script that would say go off and execute all my.
Well,
You write a .t file that executes it, or how do you?
What if you had a Distilla plugin that exported that as a test that gets released?
Yeah, but then I have to beat you. That's just really not pleasant.
well,
I'm just no fan of
It would only be
Distilla.
required for the person
It's-
releasing it.
I know.
It wouldn't be required for the person installing.
I joke. I'm not a particular fan of Distilla, and it's that kind of answer that's kind of wide, but I understand that it does a good job for those things.
so probably if you're going to use it, you would kind of like what he was suggesting. You would just use it during your development.
Before releasing.
It does have the option to generate tests, so you could generate test files using it, and then those test files would just go in your T directory, and they would become part of your distribution.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to do that, yeah.
So you make it part of your release process somehow, whether it's Distilla or else.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's see, inline testing. Mock objects. This is another strategy that I'm rather fond of. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like it, but the nice thing about mock objects is you can set yourself up with everything that you need to test a very thin sliver of your system. So basically, you mock everything and everything down here, and you test this part, and then you mock that, and you test this part, and then you just mock the different layers, and you don't have to worry about if something in the bottom part is broken, because when you're testing the piece that you really want to test, it's gonna mock it. And there's piles of mock modules out there. You got DVD mock, mock Apache, mock Quick, which just lets you make an object. You just tell it what methods you want to do. Mock populate, which actually generates data for you. And this one I thought was just kind of funny. Tiny Mocker. I don't know what it does. I just thought it was a funny. Anyway, then there's custom test modules, which the tab protocol is so simple. Writing a test module of your own is equally simple, and in fact, there's proof of that because I wrote this one. It's called Test Bomb, and basically it's a time bomb, and you put it in your test script, and the test script will run fine until a particular date or other event passes, and then it will fail. Because if you haven't written the tests by then you really need to. And it's even designed so that if you happen to try to release it before that date has passed, it will explode at that point too. It's just designed to make sure that this particular feature gets dealt with eventually.
And what does it do when it blows up?
It just says fail. It just
fun.
well, I mean, it's basically it's just a switch.
Oh, you could
It's
use
okay.
Acme Boom or something fun like Acme. You know Acme Boom? It's a CPAN module that causes Perl to segfault, which is a lot of fun.
You really need a CPAN module to do that?
You can put it. You don't need to go to Access for it. That's the interesting bit.
I thought maybe it was going to give you like a neat little ASCII graph or something.
Oh, I'm sure there's that too. But
So yeah, it's okay until the time passes, and then it's not okay. So it's not that exciting.
I think I wrote to do until, which does exactly the same thing.
What's that?
To do until.
Oh, yeah, that would probably do just fine. And for writing test modules, there's Test Builder, which helps you manage a lot of the strange things that you come upon. It's kind of odd writing tests. Test Bomb, at the foundation, it was really simple, but as soon as I started mucking around with making it do certain things, I didn't invoke Test Builder, but I can see why people would, because it handles all kinds of stuff for you. And then there's Test Tester, which will test your tests.
can I just say that I'm going to put a giant asterisk on the last two of those there and have a hopefully not longer than 2 minutes rebuttal to some of this at the end of it. So
You could feel free to rebut right now if you'd like.
okay, I'll rebut right now. There is a huge reworking of Test More, Test Builder, Test Tester that's in the works.
Okay. Cool.
Almost all of the same stuff on CPAN will keep working just fine, but some of what's been hard so far has been testing your test modules, and Test Tester doesn't really do a good enough job of that. Subtests are a little bit fragile, and part of what this replacement would do is fix a lot of that stuff. The problem is, getting everyone to agree on how it should work is harder than it ought to be. And so, though it was supposed to come out actually about, I think probably it was supposed to come out about a week ago, it's now on the, see if the greater powers that be approve of it ever list at this point. So
I'd like to put a big asterisk on what you just said.
Okay.
With a rebuttal.
Okay.
I think it's weird that you think that it shouldn't be hard to get people to agree on things. Getting people you have two people in a room, it's pretty much guaranteed they're going to disagree about something. It's so, I
disagree with that.
There you go.
All this goes to say is, when you look at particularly those last two, like don't right now at this moment go build something giant built on Test Builder, because it's possible that that's going to.
I'm hoping nobody's going to build anything giant based on this talk at all. All right. Custom test modules. Other devel cover. One of the things that you need to do eventually is make sure that all of your code is tested. Devel cover will do that. And basically, you include it as part of your test suite, and it tests and makes sure that every little snippet of code is run through your test suite somewhere, that you actually run through all the different conditions, every loop, everything. And it'll let you know if you have a decent coverage with your test suite. And then there's also a test tutorial, which probably goes through everything that I've talked about and tons more.
It notes that coverage does not guarantee that all possible combinations of input data are tested and that all possible problems have been found. It's important to remember that.
Absolutely. And yeah. Anything else?
Has anyone, by show of hands, has anyone ever worked anywhere on any project ever where you had 100% test coverage of the app?
The first week.
The first week? I was gonna say, I've never seen above 50, I don't think.
Oh,
So.
we had a requirement in Bank of America for 80.
80? That's impressive.
80% coverage?
Yep.
That's impressive.
And how often did you reach it?
We were above it the entire time I was there.
I'm sorry?
Spacecraft flight software.
Oh,
Oh,
very
So,
good.
I have a question about the develop cover. If you have a conditional that has like 2 criteria, this or that,
Well,
will develop cover know if you put one?
You have to exercise both, but it won't require that you exercise all of them together. Right? It doesn't make you do 4 permutations. It makes sure you have at least the use of those booleans, which isn't quite good
Oh,
enough.
Yeah, devel cover only makes sure that each piece of code is written, is run. That's all it does. It makes sure that everything runs.
But I might say that it's way better than Python's the default test coverage tool, which is line level coverage. Have you exercised this line?
Wow.
Which you start
That seems
seeing
kinda
people
useless.
in order to hit 80% coverage start making very long lines. Like, if easy condition or incredibly hard to test condition.
Python's so easy to read.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, devel cover is only it's only good at letting you know that everything ran. It doesn't tell you everything you need to know. So that's the end.
So isn't that part of the philosophy for test-driven development, is to write more tests while you're going, so that you break a test first for the function that you're planning on writing to increase your coverage percentage? I mean, isn't that kind of why it's
Writing-
called
I
test-driven?
wouldn't say that's true, actually.
What?
I wouldn't, no, not at all.
Okay.
Because it depends on what your methodology is for test-driven development, but generally speaking, a lot of people will do a lot more integration testing with test-driven development than unit testing, where it'll cover every single little condition within the thing. So as long as even if you're doing unit tests, as long as you have a test per method, a lot of people will call that good enough during test-driven development.
Yeah.
It's not, obviously, depending on the complexity of the method, it certainly won't execute everything in it.
Yeah.
So your code coverage would not be, good even if every method was tested.
Yeah, unfortunately I think that's true.
On the other hand, I do find it helpful, or sometimes, not always, depends on what development mode kind of I'm in, but I do find it helpful when writing a new method to think about, okay, how am I going to test this method, and just write a few tests of it right off the bat to say, okay, given these common parameters, is it going to do what it's supposed to do?
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I use inline a lot of times. Is I'll just sit there. I'm writing this method, and I'm thinking about how well this is going to work. And the first thing I do is I go down, a few lines, and I write the test. And the test is right there, and I can look at the two, and I can run it through my inline test script, and yeah, it works. And I can give it 75 different inputs, and if they all come out the way I like, then I know that it works.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think that a lot of companies do that. Like I said, I haven't been in that, so I don't know, but.
I also find that it's good for my discipline sometimes, and again, I'm not always good about doing this, but if I do write the tests first, if I'm thinking, okay, this is what I want it to do, so let's write some tests, and then I can, develop it until it can pass those. I have gotten myself into trouble not doing that by writing something and having my internal spec for what it's supposed to do kind of morph in the middle, and then I come out
That's
and
always dangerous.
I don't know, and then it's like not clear that it actually is consistent and works in the way that, so.
Especially when you're working on this big thing and you realize you need the little thing, you start writing the little thing morphs. And now does the big thing work because the little thing's different? Yeah. I've done that.